Julio Jones. Is there any chance the Patriots trade for Julio? And look, Mike Lombardi said on his podcast today that from his perspective, it does make a little bit of sense, right? The Patriots feel like they're a Julio Jones away from really being a contender, right? When they get that true number one X wide receiver, it puts everybody else that they signed this offseason into the proper order in the pecking order. It makes the tight ends' jobs easier. It makes Nelson Aguilar's job easier. You have a complete offense now with Julio on the outside. So for all those reasons, it makes a lot of schematic sense, and it definitely would put the Patriots in a different enchilada, or a different tier, I would say, from a roster just on paper standpoint. But they also invested a ton of money in pass catchers this offseason, and this is another steep investment in a pass catcher. Where do you stand on the Julio stuff?
So, yeah, I mean, some of it comes down to the contract. Can you get him to rework his contract? Because his dead money is just gross right now. I'm pulling it up right here. It's $40 million. Well, I guess you would, if you trade from this year, you're not cutting him. But $23 million cap hit this year, $20 million cap hit with 17.5 of dead cap next year. And there's a $7 million out after that, after his age 33 season. So if you add, I'm going to kind of tie this into the Celtics a little bit. Like, let me use the Celtics as an analogy here. When the Celtics were, building that team, and they signed Horford and they signed Hayward and they drafted Tatum, right? When they added Kyrie Irving, and I'm not saying that Julio Jones, I know that there's baggage with Kyrie Irving. Let's just put that to the side for a second. When they went and they added that max player and they made that trade with Isaiah Thomas, right? That was kind of, at that point, it was cemented. This is the group. You're going to have to make a monumental change to alter this core. You're cementing that in they cemented that in as the group for 2 years. And if they'd had more flexibility, who knows? Maybe they're not in the spot they're in. I'm not saying Julio Jones would blow up like Kyrie. Don't take that out of context. What I'm saying is the way the roster's constructed right now, the way his contract looks right now, you have to be sure that we're not going to need to make any more big additions for the next 2 years. This is our core. You add Julio Jones, this is the core. And where that gets scary is where they're at the cornerback position, with Stephon Gilmore and J.C. Jackson both on one-year deals. So if you can figure out a way to make his deal more friendly in the long term, Julio Jones is a tremendously talented player. Of course, if you can add him, go add him. Personally, to me, this just feels like a continuation of, it was Larry Fitzgerald every year for 3 or 4 years was coming to the Patriots. Yeah. And then it turned into Odell Beckham became the guy. And there's some overlap there. But Odell Beckham, for the last 2 off seasons coming into this one, we heard Odell Beckham, it's coming, Odell Beckham. And I feel like that torch has kind of been passed to Julio. Should they do it? Absolutely. Could they do it? There's a possibility. It feels a little bit like grasping at straws for me. But if they can do it, he's a tremendous player. It's just at 32 years old with that contract, you need to really be confident that you're going to be able to figure things out at other positions on the roster without major moves, because that's it. You're locking that in. This is the core. You're going forward. And not a bad core, but this is the group you're going forward with. Offensively, it's Julio. It's Jonnu Smith. It's Hunter Henry. Those are your big playmakers on the offensive side of the ball. And then defensively, you're focusing all your talent up front, and you're going to figure out how to piece that secondary together when Stephon Gilmore's contract expires, when J.C. Jackson's contract expires, when Devin McCourty, does he make it through that window? Do you still have him through that window? I think that's what you have to do. Again, I'm not saying no. I'm just saying that people are looking at it like it's Madden, where, we'll flip the switch for Julio Jones, whatever. There's massive roster ramifications because of that contract if you make this move. And I just think, this isn't just, Julio's good, let's go get him. You need to look at the big picture here before you pull the trigger on this.
Uncharacteristically aggressive, Alex.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
You don't run an uncharacteristically aggressive offseason, and then the Falcons, who are dangling Julio Jones out there at this point because of their salary cap being so tight up against the salary cap, they have no wiggle room. They want to move on from that contract. The Athletic reported today that they would like to trade Julio Jones if the right deal comes across the table. So you look at the deal and you say, it's a second-round pick for Julio Jones. Now now it's too rich, right? Like, now we've invested too much. I'm not saying that. I'm saying, if you're saying don't do it, that's what you're telling me, is that because we paid the tight ends, because we played Aguilar, and because we played Kendrick Bourne, we can't invest any more at the pass catcher, at the receiver position.
Right. So I think that's true for I think that's true for like 95% of the players that were available, right?
Yeah.
The people, I mean, who else were people clamoring for them to sign? Like all these people, why don't they sign Golden Tate?
Right.
Why don't they sign, these sorts of guys?
Sure.
Then what you said is absolutely true. Julio Jones, if he's healthy, even if he's 80% of what he was at his peak, which is probably about where he is right now, is a transcendent talent. And, that to me, second round pick, yes. I'm probably stopping at a first because, like I just said, you're more or less cooked in free agency at that point. And I think you're going to need a way to bring talent onto the roster. And I think those first round picks are valuable. Maybe a pick swap, a first for a second or something like that. I don't know that I'm giving up a top 30 pick. Second round pick, if it's like a second and a fourth for Julio Jones. Yeah. I also think this is where you get creative. If they were to make this move, this is where you get, and this kind of goes against what I said, but just hang with me here. This is where you get creative with J.C. Jackson, Stephon Gilmore. Those two guys are both on expiring contracts right now. You can't let them both walk. Ideally, you extend both of them. That's probably not realistic. Ideally, you extend one and move one. And if that's maybe something you can facilitate here and bring in Julio Jones and use that as an excuse to get some long-term security at the cornerback position, maybe that's where you go with it. So, I don't know that that's what I do. That wouldn't be my first avenue to pursue it. But if we're going to have this conversation, Evan, if we're going to talk about Julio Jones, I think you need to talk about the cornerbacks, although you seem relatively put off by me floating that.
Yeah, I don't want to trade the cornerbacks because I have no idea who's going to play cornerback if the Patriots trade either one of those guys.
Something
are you going to put Jawan Williams out there?
But something has to happen with those guys one way or the other, no?
I guess. I mean, I don't know why. Like, you can play JC Jackson on his restricted free agent tender, like they've done with many different players.
What are you doing with Gilmore? What if they can't reach an extension with Gilmore?
If they can't reach an extension with Gilmore, and the only way that the Falcons will entertain a trade for Julio Jones is by including Gilmore, then I guess you have to have that conversation. But to me, if you're going to be able to get Julio Jones for just a draft pick, then you're hanging on to Gilmore and you're going for it, right? Like
that's fair. That's
the team. And I think that this is the last thing I want to say about Julio is just, this is why you draft a quarterback in the first round and only pay Cam Newton $5.5 million, is so that you can go out there and spend $325 million in free agency and trades to retool the rest of the roster around the quarterback. You have the manageable asset at the quarterback position right now in Mac Jones. You have the cheap QB under contract for at least 4 years, if not 5 years, at a cost control value. That's the benefit of that. That's the beauty of that. And the other thing I'll just wrap it up with this is that with Julio, like, that's the icing on the cake, right? So I understand that he's had some injuries. I understand that he's older, but he's the icing on the cake. And if the way that it gets done to me for the Patriots is if Julio Jones is willing to rip up his current contract, play on a 1-year deal, and reset his value next offseason, right? Because there is a chance that he comes here. I'm not saying he's going to catch 20 touchdown passes, but he has like a Moss-like impact on the Patriots offense, and he signs one more big deal with a team that he wants to go to next offseason and kind of resets his value, because no team, the Falcons or the Patriots, are likely to continue with this contract that he's currently on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what it comes down to. And the other thing with Julio, with the injuries, I think if he's not coming here, I can't imagine they would play him 85, 90% of the offensive snaps.
Yeah.
It's probably more somewhere in the 60 to 70% range. Maybe you push 75. If you bring, because you have to remember, there's only between the tight ends and the running backs and the wide receivers. And I think this is the most forgotten point of the Patriots offseason, is there's only so many snaps. You can only have 5 skill position players on the field at a time, and there's only so many plays per game that you can come up with different alignments. So you're not bringing in Julio to be a 100-catch guy. You're bringing in Julio to spell with Jonnu Smith, to spell with Hunter Henry as an upgrade over Nelson Aguilar. And the idea is if you can keep 2 of those 3 guys on the field at all times, and you basically play 2 of those, you're playing 2/3 of that group every time, probably only keep putting all 3 on the field when you really need it. That's the plan here. It's to keep everybody healthy. You get better. You know, Julio's not a platoon player by any means, but the idea is you're keeping everybody. You don't need him. I don't think the Patriots need him right now, right? He's not going to make or break things. Like you said, he's the cherry on top. You're bringing him in to put that offense on another echelon where guys are fresher, they're healthier, and they're competing better deeper into the season.